welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video, I'm going to be giving you the step-by-step process on how you can get into a top law school. If you guys don't know, my name is Sephora. I'm a licensed attorney and law school coach, and let's go ahead and jump right into the video. So the very first thing you are going to want to do is give yourself enough time to prepare for the law school application cycle. By the way, I am still moving in, so my apartment is not fully put together. So if you see boxes and you see things missing the glass, don't worry, it'll get done. Okay, give yourself enough time to prepare for the law school application cycle. I generally recommend a minimum of a year. Yes, 12 months. A lot of people do not start the application process early enough, and that is why they find themselves rushing. That is why they find themselves unable to raise their LSAT score. That's why they are rushing with their application materials and writing. That's why they're struggling and having to apply at the very, very end of the application cycle in February, March. And those are things you don't want to do. To avoid that, to the best of your ability, you want to start 1 full year in advance, okay? So let me explain why 1 full year. You are going to start studying for the LSAT. Yes, you're going to start studying for the LSAT. Why? Because that first 6 months, you are going to be able to gauge, like, hey, am I able to raise my LSAT score? What does my studying look like? And if you're doing the requisite amount of study hours, then you're going to be able to make these determinations. What should my goal score be? If I'm studying 5 hours per week, if I'm studying 10 hours per week, how is my practice test scores improving over time during that first 6 months, right? And then after that first 6 months, then you can make a realistic determination. Do I need to go get an LSAT tutor? Do I need to get an LSAT course? Do I need to change or do something different because I'm not increasing at the pace I should be increasing after 6 months of serious studying, whether that be 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week or whatever? You're not seeing the increase. Do you need to go make a change? Do you need to get that tutor? Do you need to do what you need to do to raise your score to get into those top law schools, right? Because your LSAT score is a strong determinant, if not the most important determinant for these top law schools, okay? So giving yourself that first 6 months to do it on your own and to figure out, okay, how can I actually see what my own progression is going to look like is so important. Now, I also have clients who just jump right in with a tutor, right? Because generally speaking, if you start off with a score in the 150s, let's just say a 155, a good even number, but if your goal for 175, that's a 20-point jump. And generally speaking, that's not happening in 3 months. That's almost not even happening in 6 months, right? And so again, even if you immediately started off with a tutor, you're looking for those big jumps like that to get into the 170s, and your initial score is in the 150s, and even for some of you in the 140s, then you need that year to give yourself that time to jump your score that high, right? So that is why I recommend starting with a full year, because that LSAT studying is most important. So the other reason you want to give yourself 12 months is because of your application materials. A strong law school application takes a minimum of 3 months to build, but if you're a non-traditional applicant or you've otherwise worked 5+ years before going to law school and you are still working full-time while trying to apply to law school like I was, you are going to need to give yourself more time. I spent about 5 months on my application materials alone, okay? And a lot of my clients, it's the same thing. And why is it that you want to start the 12 months in advance in addition to your LSAT studying? Because again, if you can focus those first 6 months solely on your LSAT, then the latter 6 months, you can also begin working on your application materials. And that takes time. A lot of people, when they think their application materials is just jumping right in and starting writing, but that is not the case, especially if you're aiming for a top law school. Because we, or at least how I approach it with my clients, is we are looking at everything. Understand that top law schools are getting a lot of applicants. They're getting a lot of qualified applicants. They're getting a lot of competitive applicants, and most of these applicants have high scores. If you're aiming to get into a top law school, you have to have more than high scores, okay? And I'm gonna tell you a story about that in a second, but you have to have more than high scores. And so that's when everything else comes to play, right? So you're thinking about your application materials. So I always say, if you're aiming for a top law school, you have your 3 factors: your LSAT, your GPA, your application materials. Those are the 3 most important. You cannot be missing 2 of the 3. Like, you cannot be bad or low on 2 of the 3 if you're aiming for a top law school, right? Because again, a lot of applicants, a lot of qualified applicants, a lot of competitive applicants. So you can't be bad on 2 of the 3. Okay, so with your law school application materials then, why start around the 6-month mark or give yourself at least that 6 months? Because other than the actual writing, before you start writing, you need to engage in application prep. This is the piece that so many people miss. You need to engage in application prep. That's the brainstorming process. What is it you need to be writing about? What is your holistic story? What do you need to add to your resume, if anything? Where do you need to go and negotiate, if anything? What relationships do you need to build up with the recommenders who you're going to ask to write your letters, if you do need to do that? If you have a low GPA, can you get your undergrad to remove some of those grades from your transcript? And that, again, takes time. I had a couple of clients using my templates do it successfully, but it took around 3 months to get it done. So if you're just starting your application later in the cycle, and you're trying to do that, and the undergrad takes 3 months for that to happen, you're kind of already out of luck, right? So all the things that I was just talking about and just mentioning and a whole lot more is why you have to start this process early enough in the application cycle, right? Or even arguably before that application cycle starts. And if you guys are interested, I do have a free law school application timeline that can help guide you through this if you are working full-time. That timeline will be linked in the description box below. If you already know you want law school coaching because you're getting ready to apply, go ahead and just go to toppingthecurve.com and sign up for one of our coaching opportunities. Okay, so that 12 months, you're giving yourself that 12 months. And I'm gonna give you some months so that you can actually put this into perspective. Let's use fall 2026. So if you're applying to start law school in fall 2026, because if you're watching this video, hopefully, baby, hopefully you've already done all this stuff if you're applying for fall 2025. But okay, if you're applying for fall 2026, ideally, let's say you start studying in, let's say you start studying in August, right? Let's say you start studying in August 2024, okay? August 2024. So from August 2024 to January 2025, that's about 6 months of LSAT studying. You got that out the way. You're seeing, okay, do I need a tutor? Do I want to come and join Sephora's group and get tutoring with her? Do I want to get another tutor? Whatever it may be, right? So you're doing that 6 months from August 2024 to January 2025. Now, in January 2025 or February 2025, you start roping in that application prep process. Where do you need to improve? What do you need to add to your resume? Who are your recommenders going to be and how are those relationships? And I mean, there's so much things involved in application prep that it can be its own video. I do have some stuff up on it on Instagram and on TikTok, and maybe I'll make a whole nother YouTube video on application prep, because there's so much involved in application prep, right? The brainstorming process, the outlining process. I mean, there's so much to it. So you start that in February, right? The application prep process usually takes 2 to 3 months. So February, let's say March, April, May. So now you're in May 2025. Ideally, at this point, you are either taking the May LSAT or taking the June LSAT because you started that full year in advance, right? So when you take the May LSAT or the June LSAT, you're also wrapping up your application prep and you are begin your writing process, the actual writing of your application materials. And that is another, I would say, 2 to 3 months, which is why I say in total 5 months on your application, or a minimum 3 months, but a total like 5 to 6 months really, right? So then you either take the May or June LSAT and then you're beginning your application materials, and that brings you right through to August/September, and you are hitting submit to law schools and you're applying early in the application process. Yay! Okay? So understand that that's why if you're aiming for a top law school, you do want to the best of your ability, give yourself that leeway. And this timeline that I'm talking about and giving to you, it's not assuming you're working 20 hours per week on your application materials. Like, we all have lives. I just talked about how I was doing this while I was working full time. Most of my clients are working full time. They've had long careers before applying to law school. That is why you need to start this in advance, because this timeline gives you the opportunity, gives you the time necessary, gives you the breath, gives you the leeway to where if 1 week you can't do anything, you're still fine. If there's a 2 weeks you can't do anything, you're still fine. If you're starting later in the process, you don't have this leeway, and that's what ends up pushing you later and later and later in the cycle. Now, August and September are really early in the application cycle, of course, even October, but again, this is assuming that, hey, maybe you don't like your June LSAT score and you decide to retake September. You're still good. You're still good, you know? Okay, so all of that was number one. Can you believe that? Now we have number two. I kind of talked about this already, but if you're aiming for a top law school, you're gonna wanna get a good LSAT score, right? So hard numbers for top law schools are, in a way, non-negotiable. And what I mean by that is you can do everything you can to mitigate those low numbers. If you had to mitigate low numbers, if you have it, I've done it for tons of my clients. I have clients with 2.2 and at a school ranked in the 40s, client with a 3.1 and at a school and in a T25, client with a 2.9 and at a T25 and actually T20, but was in at a school in the teens. But these, my client results are on my website. It needs to be updated, to be fair. But also, hard numbers to an extent can be mitigated, but they can only be mitigated so much. Remember what I said? You need at least 2 out of the 3. So all of those clients I just talked about, they engaged in that process and in those application writing things that I just talked about to make sure their other 2 were very strong. Because all the examples I just gave you, they had low GPAs. I do have some with varying stats, right? But even so, the story I wanted to talk to you about was why you have to think about all 3 or at least 2 out of the 3 for top law schools. Is I had a client come to me, she wasn't a client yet, but I had someone come to me who was starting law school this year with a score she scored in the LSATs, low 170s, and her GPA was a 3.7. She didn't get into any school ranked higher than schools ranked in the 40s. Now, by all means, school ranked in the 40s and 50s are great law schools, but with her hard numbers, with her high GPA and her high LSAT, she thought she would be a shoo-in for those higher ranking schools, but she wasn't. And this goes to exactly what I was talking about earlier. When you're aiming for these top law schools, you have to have more. You have to show more, or at least at the very, very least, you have to not take yourself out of the running by submitting application materials or showcasing other things in your materials that raises red flags or makes admissions counselors think you won't be a good fit for law school, right? And when you contrast that potential client's results that I didn't work with her on, she was coming to me for law student coaching, with the results I just gave you with my other clients who had worse numbers than she did, right? So the 3.1 had a 165, the 2.9, I think, also had a 165, and then the 2.2 had a 164. All of them got into higher schools than this other potential client over here. And so you see what I mean when I'm saying, when you're aiming for these top law schools, you cannot disregard certain pieces of your application because they do matter. You're going into a profession where you're going to need to know how to write, where you're going to need to know how to use your voice, whether it be on paper or whether it be aloud, especially if you're thinking about going into litigation. But the point is, one thing that I could never understand why people said or thought or just anything along those lines is, oh, your application materials don't matter. Do you realize what you're going to be doing as an attorney? And even in both of my federal clerkships, in my firms, all of that stuff, what I hear all the time from attorneys is they can always tell the quality of someone's capabilities as an attorney by looking at their writing. And so if you are writing your application materials and you can't even demonstrate basic writing skills, that's probably going to raise a red flag. For those of you who don't know, Topping the Curve used to be a podcast, and I don't remember her exact title, but I had a T14 admissions dean on there, and she was kind of talking about this, right? The applicant had put in their application materials, made her question the applicant. She also talked about how important the personal statement was. I mean, I feel like you have to pay attention to what you are writing, and especially if you're aiming for top law schools, everything comes together as one, okay? So now, wow, okay guys, I didn't think this would go this long, but let's keep going. So number 3, you have to identify your goals and find law schools that can get you there. So if you're aiming for a top law school, whether it be because you want a big law job or a federal clerkship, you then need to go look at the law school's numbers. So by look at the law school's numbers, I mean look up the facts. Do not listen to people on the internet. Do not listen to people who are just saying things. There are facts, literally. And I have shown the facts on here, on TikTok, multiple times. There are 15 just about, and I think this was 2022 data, 15 law schools that place over 50% of their graduates into big law. There are likewise a small number of law schools that place the majority of federal law clerks. Does this mean that going to one of these schools that don't have high percentages or high placement rates into big law or clerkships means you can't land one? Absolutely not. But does it mean that you have a higher chance at one of those other schools that do have those higher numbers? Yes. Yes, it's logic. It's literally logic. So when people get online and they're like, don't listen to this, you know, nothing is impossible. You can go to any school and work your booty off and network and do what you need to do and get the job you want to get, even if you don't land it straight out of law school. However, my position to you is at the application stage, you have the most power in your hands. Do what you can there to get into a school that's going to make it easier for you later on. You cannot go to law school and guarantee that you're going to graduate top of your class. You can't go to law school and guarantee that you're going to be able to land the job immediately after law school that you want to land. Give yourself the highest possible chance of making those things a reality at the application stage by going to the schools that have the numbers that will put you there almost, I don't want to say guaranteed because nothing's guaranteed, but will make it very easy for you. I have a whole video on how I did, I think it's 10, 8, whatever, however many big law firm interviews my 1L year. However many big law interviews my 2L year. I have a video on my I don't know if the video is on my 2 federal clerkships, but I have a video on, actually, I think it will be up by the time this video is up. I have a video on the benefits of doing federal clerkships, and I have a video up on the differences between a district court and a circuit court clerkship, both of which I have done. I mean, there are schools that will make these things easy for you, and that's why it's so important for you to know your goals at the application stage and do what you can now at the application stage to make that a reality for you. Okay, number 4, if you are aiming to get into a top law school, you need to focus on everything. And I'm going to give you an example here. When I was doing my clerkship, when I'm interviewing people who want to come and work for the judge, who want to land the job. So I already have the job, I'm outgoing and I'm interviewing people for the following year. I'm not just looking at their GPA. I'm not just looking at their writing sample. I'm not just looking at the classes they took. I'm not just looking at their recommenders. I am looking at everything. I'm looking at everything. Did I recommend to my judge that he take people who have lower grades than someone else because they have an overall better holistic application? Absolutely. Yes. And that is the exact process you have to think about when you're aiming for these top law schools. You have to look at the whole. Think back to that example I just gave you of that potential client for law student coaching who had those high numbers, versus my other clients who I did work with on applicant coaching whose numbers weren't as high as hers but had better results. That's exactly what I'm talking about. When you're aiming for these top law schools, you have to think about how can you position yourself as a holistic applicant. That includes your LSAT, that includes your GPA, that includes your application materials. And not only your application materials, but also it includes the exact things that you are saying in your application materials, right? So you don't just want to choose your topics blindly. Everything has to go together. Think about how you can best present yourself as an applicant who is going to do well in law school and ultimately do well post-law school as an attorney, and make that clear in your application. Build relationships and build stories, build connections with those admissions counselors, because they are more likely to let you in if you have a holistic application that showcases your strengths as an applicant, or as a student and as an individual. Right? And even as a worker, because so many people who I work with have tons of work experience, have been, have children, have done all these things, but they're focusing on the wrong things in their law school application. Or what they do is they go and they tell a life history or just like all the accomplishments they've done, or they try and focus on the law they want to practice, or they just tell me things. They're like, because I have done this, I am so strong and I am so resilient and blah, 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 blah. You need to show, not tell. You can tell me all that stuff if you want to, but that doesn't mean I have to take you at your word. I want you to show me, right? And you have to do this in your application, because that's what's going to make admissions counselors want you at their law school. Okay, I know I am running long here, but if you're still watching, then you're probably gonna get into a top law school. Okay, so number 6, oh no, sorry, I skipped. Number 5, find someone to review your application materials. This one for me is a non-negotiable. Obviously, I would love if you come and work with me, but there are plenty of people out there, qualified people, let me be clear, because I've got a ton of reapplicants who have come to me and said the person who they went to either didn't know what they were doing, or I'm not getting into that. But find someone to review your application materials. Ask them what they are getting from your application materials when they read it. Ask them what type of applicant they think this presents you as. Ask them to review and look for any grammar mistakes, anything that looks contradictory, and you have to give them the entire application package. I think that too many people will just send their personal statement. And again, that goes back to what I'm saying about it's an entire application package. Everything goes together. This is why we review things as a whole. This is why my team reviews things in packages, because everything goes together. If you're saying something in your personal statement, I need to know what else you're saying over here in your diversity statement, or in your optional statement, or in your resume, or in your addendum, because I have had clients who wanted to say something in an addendum that would completely contradict what they wrote in their personal statement. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. You're presenting two sides of a different coin. That's not going to make you stand out. It's going to raise those red flags or raise those questions for those admissions counselors that you want to avoid. You want them to have a very clear understanding and picture of who you are as a law school applicant. Okay, number 6 is to apply early in the application cycle. My general advice is apply as early as you can with as strong an application as you can. However, if you are in by Thanksgiving, then you are pretty much early in the cycle. And I have a whole video already on why everyone should apply early in the law school application cycle, so I'm not going to go into details with that. But guys, I do want to say that we have a law school application mastermind coming up. In that law school application mastermind, you will learn everything I just talked about in this video. I will teach you how to write your law school application materials, what to write about in your law school application materials, how to format it. You will get to attend 2 coaching calls with me every single week for 4 weeks. You'll get to ask me your questions. You're going to join a group chat. You're going to join a community of people who are likewise applying just like you are. And I am going to be here with you every step of the way to get you into the law school of your dreams. If you would like to join that law school application mastermind, it is at toppingthecurve.com/application-mastermind, or just click the link in the description box, go to toppingthecurve.com and click work with us, and you will see that mastermind. We can only accept 20 people for this law school application mastermind. This is the second iteration. Our first one in June was a huge success, and I'm excited to do this second one. So again, we can only accept 20 people, and at the time of this recording, some of these spots are already gone, so make sure you go and grab your ticket, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys on my next one. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Topping the Curve. Bye.